Imagine a universe where warnings echo across galaxies, where ancient seers speak of creatures so unpredictable that even touching their world means doom. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council heeded one simple rule: avoid the third planet of the Sol system at all costs. They called its inhabitants two-legged tempests, beings whose very nature defied every law of civilization, diplomacy, and common sense. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. When the Zephyrian Empire's greatest military minds decided that no primitive species could possibly threaten their technological superiority, they made a choice that would reshape the cosmos forever. They ignored the Seer's warning. They descended through Earth's atmosphere with conquest in their hearts and superiority in their minds. What they discovered wasn't just another species to subjugate. What they found was something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about strength, resilience, and the terrifying beauty of beings who turn their greatest weakness into their most devastating weapon. This is the story of first contact gone catastrophically wrong, or perhaps terrifyingly right. Admiral Thexvar stood before the massive holographic display in the command center of the Zephyrian dreadnought Cosmic Dominion, his forearms crossed in a gesture of supreme confidence. The blue-green planet rotating slowly before him looked utterly unremarkable, yet it had been marked as forbidden territory for nearly 3 millennia. The thought irritated him more than he cared to admit. "Sir," came the nervous voice of Communications Officer Veltara, her scaled hands trembling slightly as she approached. "The Council's final transmission is coming through now." The hologram flickered, and the ancient face of Seer Mordoon materialized before them. His weathered features, marked by centuries of wisdom and warning, carried an expression of deep concern. The Seer's voice resonated through the command center with an authority that had guided the Galactic Council through countless crises. "Admiral Thexvar," the Seer began, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy, "I implore you one final time to reconsider this course of action. The inhabitants of the third planet are not as they appear. Our archives speak of them as the two-legged Tempest, beings whose very nature defies comprehension. They are chaos incarnate, unpredictable in ways that make them more dangerous than any force we have encountered." Thexvar's mandibles clicked in annoyance. 3,000 years of avoiding contact with what appeared to be a primitive civilization seemed like cowardice to him. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 star systems, subjugated hundreds of species, and established the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known. The idea that some bipedal creatures on a backwater planet could pose any threat was absurd. "Seer," Thexvar replied, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain, "with all due respect to your wisdom, the Zephyrian Empire does not cower from primitives. Our scouts have confirmed that these humans possess only the most basic technology. They have barely achieved spaceflight. Their weapons are crude chemical propellants, and they spend most of their time fighting amongst themselves. They are perfect candidates for subjugation and integration into our empire." The Seer's expression grew even more troubled. "Admiral, you speak of what you can measure and observe, but you fail to understand what cannot be quantified. These beings possess something that our greatest philosophers have struggled to comprehend for millennia. They call it humanity, and it makes them capable of things that defy every logical prediction." "Mystical nonsense," Thexvar muttered, though several of his junior officers exchanged uncertain glances. The Seer's warnings had never been wrong before, but they had also never seemed so abstract and unscientific. "Very well," the Seer continued, resignation creeping into his ancient voice. "But know this, Admiral. When the two-legged Tempest rises to meet you, do not say that you were not warned. They are not bound by the same limitations that govern the rest of us. Where we see impossibility, they see opportunity. Where we accept defeat, they find victory. And where we show mercy, they show a fierce protection that burns like the heart of a star." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in an uncomfortable silence. Thexvar looked around at his crew, noting the uncertainty in their expressions. This would not do. His empire had not been built on fear and superstition. "Attention, crew of the Cosmic Dominion," he announced, his voice booming through the ship's communication system. "We stand on the threshold of adding another world to our glorious empire. Below us lies a planet inhabited by a primitive species that has somehow convinced the Galactic Council to treat them as forbidden territory. Today, we will show the galaxy that the Zephyrian Empire bows to no superstition and fears no primitive race." The crew began their preparations with practiced efficiency, though whispers of the Seer's warning continued to circulate through the corridors. The Cosmic Dominion was a marvel of Zephyrian engineering, stretching nearly 2 kilometers in length and armed with plasma cannons capable of reducing continents to ash. Its crew of 12,000 represented the finest warriors and tacticians the Empire could produce. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, the ship's sensors began collecting data on the planet below. The readings were exactly what Thexfar had expected. The humans possessed no orbital defenses, no energy shields, and no weapons capable of threatening a ship of this magnitude. Their cities, while numerous, showed no signs of advanced military installations. Most tellingly, their response to the massive alien vessel entering their atmosphere was chaotic and uncoordinated. "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Zarthan, "we're detecting multiple communications attempting to contact us. The transmissions are coming from dozens of different sources, and they appear to be using primitive radio waves." "Ignore them," Thexvar commanded. "Begin scanning for the most populated areas. We'll start with their major population centers and work our way down. A show of force should convince them to surrender quickly." But as they descended lower, something unexpected began to happen. The chaotic communications suddenly became more organized. Military installations that had seemed primitive moments before began showing signs of coordinated activity. Most disturbing of all, the humans below were not fleeing in panic as every other species had done when faced with Zephyrian might. "Admiral," Velterra called out, her voice tight with confusion, "I'm detecting massive population movements, but they're not evacuation patterns. It looks like they're mobilizing." "Mobilizing?" Thexfar laughed. "With what? Their chemical projectile weapons? Their crude aircraft?" Through the viewing ports, they could see the sprawling cities of Earth growing larger as they descended, but instead of the expected chaos and panic, they observed something else entirely. Highways filled with vehicles moving in organized patterns toward strategic locations, aircraft taking off from hidden air bases that their initial scans had somehow missed. And strangest of all, massive structures emerging from what had appeared to be empty ground, as if the humans had been hiding their true capabilities beneath a facade of primitiveness. "Sir," Zarthan reported, his voice now carrying a note of concern, "our detailed scans are revealing hidden installations everywhere. Underground facilities, camouflaged weapons systems, and what appears to be a global communication network far more sophisticated than our initial assessment." Thexfar felt the first stirring of unease in his chest. Impossible. Our long-range sensors would have detected any advanced technology unless, Velterra said quietly, they were designed specifically to fool our sensors. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the humans had been deliberately hiding their true capabilities, it meant they had not only known about the Zephyrian Empire, but had been preparing for this encounter. But how could a species that had never left their own solar system know about galactic civilizations? "Admiral." The voice of scanner operator Kildex cut through the tension. "I'm detecting energy buildups across the planet's surface. Massive power signatures emerging from underground sources. On the main display, dots of light began appearing across the continents below. Hundreds of them, then thousands, each representing a power source that rivaled the output of their own ship's reactor. The pattern was unmistakable. The humans had been waiting for this moment, and they had prepared accordingly. "Atad," Sir Velterra whispered, "what if the Seer was right? What if we've made a terrible mistake?" Before Thexfar could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began blaring. The tactical display showed dozens of objects rising from Earth's surface, moving at velocities that should have been impossible for the primitive propulsion systems they had observed. But these weren't chemical rockets or primitive spacecraft. These were weapons, and they were moving with a precision and speed that suggested technology far beyond what any surface scan had revealed. "Evasive maneuvers!" Thexvar shouted, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "All weapons to defensive mode!" But as the cosmic dominion began its evasive maneuvers, something even more unsettling became apparent. The human weapons weren't just advanced, they were adapting. Each course correction the ship made was immediately countered by corresponding adjustments from the rising projectiles, as if the humans were somehow predicting their movements. "How is this possible?" Thexvar demanded. "Our stealth systems should make us invisible to their sensors." "Sir," Kildex reported, his voice shaking, "I don't think they're tracking us with sensors. I think they're tracking us with mathematics." The concept was alien to the Zephyrian mind. They had built their empire on superior technology, overwhelming force, and the predictable behavior of inferior species. The idea that someone could predict their movements through pure calculation without advanced sensors or artificial intelligence was beyond their understanding. As the first wave of human weapons reached their altitude, Thexvar finally understood what the Seer had been trying to warn them about. These weren't just primitive beings defending their planet. These were creatures who had taken their apparent limitations and transformed them into advantages. Where other species would have relied on advanced technology to track an invisible ship, humans had used their minds. Where others would have panicked in the face of overwhelming force, humans had planned and prepared. The two-legged Tempest was rising to meet them, and Admiral Thexvar realized with growing horror that everything he thought he knew about conquest was about to be proven wrong. The humans weren't just defending their world, they were teaching the Zephyrian Empire a lesson in what it truly meant to underestimate one's opponent. As the first explosions rocked the cosmic dominion, Thexvar could only think of the Seer's final words. "Do not say that you were not warned." The two-legged Tempest had been awakened, and there would be no putting it back to sleep. The explosions that rocked the cosmic dominion were unlike anything in Admiral Thexvar's extensive military experience. These weren't the crude chemical detonations his intelligence reports had described. The weapons striking his ship carried exotic energy signatures that his science officers couldn't identify, and each impact seemed to bypass their advanced shielding systems as if they weren't there. "Damage report!" Thexvar bellowed as sparks cascaded from damaged control panels around the bridge. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, Chief Engineer Morgex reported, his usual composure cracking. "But sir, that's impossible. Those weapons shouldn't have been able to penetrate our quantum barriers." "The impossible," muttered Communications Officer Veltara as she struggled to restore her damaged console, "seems to be a human specialty." Through the chaos of alarms and emergency lighting, Thexvar watched the tactical display with growing disbelief. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were fighting smart. Every weapon's placement on Earth seemed perfectly coordinated, creating overlapping fields of fire that gave his ship nowhere to retreat. But more disturbing than their tactics was their apparent understanding of Zephyrian technology. "Sir," Scanner Operator Kildex called out, "I'm detecting massive troop movements across all continents. But they're not moving away from us. They're moving toward projected crash sites." "Projected crash sites," Thexvar repeated. "Yes, sir. Based on our current trajectory and damage rate, the humans appear to be calculating exactly where we'll come down and positioning forces accordingly." The implications sent a chill through the bridge crew. Not only were the humans fighting with weapons that shouldn't exist, but they were planning for outcomes that hadn't happened yet. It suggested a level of strategic thinking that their psychological profiles had deemed impossible for such an emotionally driven species. Another wave of impact shook the ship, and this time the damage was catastrophic. The main reactor's containment field fluctuated wildly before stabilizing at 60% power. Life support systems across 3 decks failed simultaneously. Most troubling of all, their long-range communication array was completely destroyed, cutting them off from the rest of the Zephyrian fleet. Admiral Tactical Officer Zarth then reported, his voice tight with professional concern masking deeper fear. "Our ship won't survive another barrage like that." Thexvar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of severe stress among his species. Everything about this encounter contradicted decades of military doctrine. The Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation on swift, decisive victories against technologically inferior foes. The standard protocol was simple: arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate superior firepower, accept the inevitable surrender, and begin the integration process. But nothing about humanity was proving to be standard. "Open a channel to the surface," he finally commanded. "All frequencies." The response came immediately, and it arrived in perfect Zephyrian language with proper military protocol markers. The fact that humans could communicate in their tongue wasn't surprising. Many species learned galactic languages through intercepted transmissions. What was surprising was how quickly they had established the connection and how calm the voice sounded. Despite the ongoing battle, "Zephyrian vessel, this is General Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force," came the transmission. "We're prepared to discuss terms." Thexvar felt a surge of relief. Finally, the humans were showing sense. "General Chen," he replied, "you are speaking to Admiral Thexvar of the Zephyrian Empire. We are prepared to accept your unconditional surrender. Lower your weapons and prepare for occupation forces." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, to Thexvar's amazement, he heard something that no conquered species had ever directed at a Zephyrian admiral: laughter. "Admiral," General Chen's voice carried an unmistakable note of amusement. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not offering to surrender. We're offering you the chance to." The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of damaged systems and the distant sound of repair crews working frantically to keep the ship functional. Thexvar found himself unable to process what he had just heard. In 3,000 years of galactic expansion, no inferior species had ever suggested that a Zephyrian force should surrender to them. That's impossible," he finally managed. "You're a primitive species. We have technology you can't even comprehend." "Do you?" General Chen's voice remained infuriatingly calm. "Because from where I'm standing, Admiral, your incomprehensible technology is currently falling out of our sky in very comprehensible pieces." As if to emphasize her point, another coordinated strike from the surface sent shockwaves through the ship's superstructure. This time the impact seemed surgically precise, targeting specific systems that would cripple the ship's offensive capabilities while leaving life support intact. "How?" Thexvar whispered, more to himself than to the human general. "How what, Admiral? How did we know you were coming? How did we prepare weapons that could hurt your ship? How did we coordinate a global defense in the few hours since you entered our system?" The general's tone shifted, becoming more serious but retaining that underlying confidence. "The answer to all of those questions is the same. We've been watching you for a very long time." The tactical display updated with new information that made Thexvar's blood run cold. Hidden installations across Earth's surface were revealing themselves, and the technology they displayed was impossible to categorize. Some appeared to be energy weapons based on principles his science team couldn't identify. Others seemed to bend space-time in ways that suggested understanding of physics beyond current Zephyrian knowledge. "Sir," Veltara whispered, "our deep scans are detecting artificial structures throughout this solar system. Not just on Earth, but on multiple planets and moons. Some of them appear to be very old." The pieces began falling into place in Thexvar's mind, creating a picture so disturbing that he almost rejected it outright. The humans hadn't just been hiding their capabilities, they had been watching the galaxy and learning from every species that had ever broadcast into space. 3,000 years of intercepted communications, stolen technology, and careful observation had given them advantages that pure technological development never could. "You've been studying us," he said, the realization heavy in his voice. "Studying everyone," General Chen confirmed. "Admiral, did you really think that a species capable of detecting radio signals from across the galaxy would limit themselves to passive observation? We've been listening to your communications, analyzing your tactics, and preparing for this moment since before your great-grandfather was born." Another realization struck him, this one even more unsettling. "The Seer's warnings. You've been listening to the Council's communications too." "Seer Mordoon is a wise being," General Chen replied. "His warnings about humanity weren't just prophecy, Admiral. They were the result of careful observation and analysis. He understood something that your military strategists missed. We're not bound by the same limitations that govern galactic civilization." "What do you mean?" "Your empire, like every other power in the galaxy, operates on the assumption that technological superiority equals military victory. You build bigger ships, more powerful weapons, stronger shields, and assume that overwhelming force will carry the day. But you've forgotten something fundamental about warfare. It's not just about the tools you use, it's about how creatively you use them." The cosmic dominion shuddered again, but this time the impacts felt different. Instead of the sharp strikes of energy weapons, these felt like physical impacts. Through the viewports, Thexvar could see small craft approaching his ship. But these weren't sleek fighters or transport vessels. They appeared to be crude, almost primitive in design. "Sir," Kildex reported, "I'm detecting boarding craft approaching from multiple vectors, but they're not using any propulsion system I can identify." Thexvar zoomed in on the approaching vessels and felt his understanding of reality shift once again. The human craft weren't using advanced propulsion at all. Instead, they appeared to be using a combination of chemical rockets, magnetic acceleration, and what looked like controlled explosions to navigate through space. It was insane, inefficient, and completely unpredictable by any tactical computer. "They're using chaos as a strategy," he whispered in amazement. "Exactly," came General Chen's voice, as if she had been monitoring his private observations. "Admiral, your computers can predict the behavior of any rational propulsion system. They can calculate intercept courses for energy-based weapons and defensive maneuvers for conventional tactics. But they can't predict what we're going to do because we don't always know what we're going to do ourselves." The first boarding craft struck the Cosmic Dominion's hull with an impact that should have destroyed both the craft and a significant portion of the ship. Instead, the human vessel seemed to absorb the collision and somehow convert the kinetic energy into a cutting beam that began slicing through the outer hull plating. "That's physically impossible," Chief Engineer Morgex stated flatly. "No," Thexvar replied, finally beginning to understand what they were facing. "It's just improbable. And humans seem to specialize in making the improbable work." More boarding craft struck the ship, each one using a different approach that defied conventional physics or engineering principles. Some seemed to phase through the hull plating entirely. Others appeared to be dissolving the molecular bonds of the ship's armor. One craft that struck near the engine section seemed to be converting matter directly into energy and then back into different matter. "Admiral!" General Chen's voice cut through the chaos of alarms and damage reports. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you prepared to discuss surrender? Because in about 3 minutes, several thousand of my best soldiers are going to be inside your ship, and they're going to be very interested in having a conversation with you about galactic politics." Thexvar looked around his bridge at his terrified crew, then at the tactical displays showing impossible human technology, and finally at the boarding craft that continued to defy every law of physics he had ever learned. The seer's words echoed in his mind. "Unpredictable in ways that make them more dangerous than any force we have encountered." For the first time in his military career, Admiral Thexvar of the Zephyrian Empire began to seriously consider the possibility that he had encountered a force that couldn't be defeated through conventional means. The two-legged Tempest wasn't just defending their planet, they were rewriting the rules of warfare itself. and they were winning. The human boarding parties moved through the cosmic dominion like nothing Admiral Thexvar had ever witnessed in his centuries of military service. They didn't follow standard assault protocols, didn't advance in predictable patterns, and didn't use conventional weapons. Instead, they seemed to flow through the ship's corridors like water finding its way around obstacles, adapting their tactics to each new challenge they encountered. "Sir," reported Security Chief Vex Kara from his position in the Central Armory, "our defensive positions are being bypassed entirely. The humans aren't even trying to engage our fortified positions. They're moving through maintenance shafts, ventilation systems, and what appears to be sections of the ship that don't exist on our blueprints." Thexvar frowned at that last statement. "Yes, sir. Our internal sensors are tracking human soldiers in areas that should be solid bulkhead. Either our sensors are malfunctioning, or the humans are somehow creating new pathways through the ship's structure." The answer came from Chief Engineer Morgex, whose voice carried a mixture of professional fascination and existential dread. "Admiral, the humans are using some kind of molecular manipulation technology. They're not cutting through our walls or melting them. They're convincing the metal to temporarily rearrange itself into doorways, then returning it to its original state once they pass through." "That's impossible," Thexvar said automatically, though the phrase was beginning to lose all meaning in the context of this encounter. "Sir," interrupted Communications Officer Valtara, "I'm receiving reports from all decks. The humans aren't causing any permanent damage to the ship's structure. They're not harming any crew members who don't resist, and they appear to be specifically targeting strategic locations while avoiding areas with high civilian populations." This information was perhaps more disturbing than reports of impossible technology. It suggested that the humans not only understood the internal layout of a Zephyrian dreadnought better than some of his own crew, but that they were conducting their boarding operation with a precision that indicated detailed intelligence about ship operations, crew distributions, and tactical weaknesses. "How?" he whispered. "How could they possibly know our ship designs?" The answer came from an unexpected source, one of the human soldiers standing in the doorway to his bridge. Thexvar spun around to find himself face to face with a creature that looked exactly as primitive as his intelligence reports had suggested. The human was small by galactic standards, covered in crude fabric clothing and carrying weapons that appeared to be barely more advanced than projectile throwers. But there was something in the being's eyes that made Thexvar's instincts scream warnings at him. "Admiral Thexvar," the human said in perfect Zephyrian, "I'm Commander Maria Santos, and to answer your question, we know your ship designs because we've been inside ships just like this one before." "Impossible. This is the first contact between our species." Commander Santos smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and terrifying. "First official contact, Admiral. But you're not the first Zephyrian expedition to visit this solar system. You're just the first one that we've allowed to get close to Earth." The implications hit Thexvar like a physical blow. If humans had encountered and presumably captured other Zephyrian vessels, it would explain their impossible knowledge of galactic technology and military tactics. But it also meant that the Empire had been losing ships and crews in this system for an unknown period of time, and somehow no word of it had ever reached the command structure. "The missing scout ships," he breathed. "The ones reported lost in hyperspace storms." "There are no hyperspace storms in this region of space," Commander Santos confirmed. "There are, however, very interested humans who have been learning everything we can about galactic civilization for the past several hundred years." As if summoned by their conversation, more human soldiers began appearing throughout the bridge. They didn't storm in with weapons blazing or make dramatic entrances. Instead, they simply appeared from locations that shouldn't have been able to contain them, moving with a casual efficiency that suggested this was routine for them. What struck Thexvar most forcefully wasn't their numbers or their weapons, but their diversity. Every other species in the galaxy had achieved interstellar civilization through unity and conformity. The Zephyrians themselves were genetically modified for optimal performance, with variations in height and coloring but fundamental similarity in capabilities and thinking patterns. But the humans on his bridge displayed a bewildering variety of physical characteristics, ages, apparent specializations, and even what seemed to be different subspecies entirely. "You're not a unified species," he observed. "Not in the way you understand unity," Commander Santos agreed. "We don't think alike, we don't look alike, and we certainly don't agree on most things. But when something threatens Earth, Admiral, we become something greater than the sum of our parts." "The two-legged Tempest," Thexvar said, finally understanding the Seer's warning. "Exactly. You see, Admiral, every other species in the galaxy that achieved interstellar travel did so by eliminating internal conflict, standardizing their societies, and thinking with a unified voice. It's efficient, it's logical, and it creates very predictable civilizations." Commander Santos gestured to her diverse team of soldiers, each of whom was monitoring different systems on the bridge with equipment that seemed to be cobbled together from a dozen different technological traditions. "We took a different path. Instead of eliminating our differences, we learned to use them. Instead of standardizing our thinking, we encouraged diversity. Instead of speaking with one voice, we learned to listen to a million voices and somehow find harmony in the chaos." "But that's inefficient," protested Tactical Officer Zarthan. "Diversity leads to conflict. Conflict leads to waste of resources. And waste leads to technological stagnation. Does it?" asked another human voice from the rear of the bridge. Thexvar turned to see General Chen materializing from what had appeared to be an empty section of wall. Unlike Commander Santos, who had at least used conventional doorways, the general seemed to have simply stepped through solid matter. "General Chen," Thexvar said, struggling to maintain some semblance of diplomatic protocol, "I assume you're here to accept our surrender." "Actually, Admiral, I'm here to offer you a choice." General Chen moved to the center of the bridge, and Thexvar noticed that his crew was watching her with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You can surrender, certainly. We'll treat your crew well, repair your ship, and send you home with a message for your empire. Or you can help us understand why you came here despite the Seer's warnings, and maybe learn something about humanity that your intelligence reports missed." Thexvar found himself genuinely curious despite his situation. "What could you possibly teach us? You're a primitive species that hasn't even achieved faster-than-light travel." General Chen's smile was enigmatic. "Haven't we, Admiral?" She gestured toward the main viewing screen, which had been displaying the battle-damaged surface of Earth. The image shifted, showing the cosmic dominion from an external perspective. But the view wasn't coming from the surface of the planet. It was coming from somewhere far above the ship, looking down at it from an impossible angle. "Our external cameras show no other vessels in this vicinity," Scanner Operator Kildex reported in confusion. "That's because you're looking for ships," General Chen explained. "But what if we told you that humanity's first ventures into faster-than-light travel didn't involve building ships at all?" The external view shifted again, and this time Thexvar could see the source of the transmission, floating in space near his ship without any visible means of support or life support equipment, was a human being. Not in a spacesuit or enclosed in an atmosphere bubble, but simply standing in the vacuum of space as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. "That's impossible," Chief Engineer Morgex whispered. "No organic life form can survive in the vacuum of space." "Most can't," General Chen agreed, "but humans have always had a talent for pushing the boundaries of what's possible." "Admiral, meet Dr. Jennifer Walsh, one of our space adaptation specialists." The figure in space waved cheerfully at the ship's cameras, then began moving toward the cosmic dominion, using nothing but what appeared to be controlled muscular movements. As she approached, it became clear that she wasn't using any form of technological assistance. She was somehow propelling herself through space, using techniques that defied every known law of physics. How was all Thexvar could manage. "The same way we do everything else, Admiral. We took our greatest weakness and turned it into our greatest strength." General Chen gestured to the diverse group of humans throughout the bridge. "Other species achieved unity by eliminating differences. We achieved something better by celebrating them." She walked over to one of her soldiers, a human who appeared to be barely more than a child by galactic standards. "This is Tommy Chen, my grandson. He's 14 years old, and he can calculate hyperspace trajectories in his head faster than your ship's navigation computer." The young human looked up from a device he had been examining and smiled. It's not that hard once you realize that space-time is more like music than mathematics. You don't calculate the notes, you feel the rhythm. Thexvar felt his worldview cracking like ice under pressure. A child can't possibly understand hyperspace mathematics. He doesn't understand them the way your computers do, General Chen explained. He understands them the way a composer understands music, or an artist understands color. It's not logical, it's not systematic, and it's absolutely not reproducible through traditional teaching methods. But it works. She moved to another soldier, this one an elderly human whose equipment seemed to be held together with what looked like primitive adhesive materials. "This is Professor Margaret O'Brien. She's 93 years old, and she's the one who figured out how to convince matter to temporarily rearrange itself at the molecular level." The elderly human looked up from what appeared to be a device she was building in real time from components salvaged from the ship's own systems. "It's all about asking nicely, dear," she said to Thexvar in a voice that reminded him of his own grandmother. "Most people try to force matter to do what they want, but if you just explain to the atoms what you need and why it's important, they're usually quite cooperative." "Atoms don't have consciousness," protested Chief Engineer Morgzex. "Don't they?" Professor O'Brien asked. "How would you know? Just because they don't think the way you do doesn't mean they don't think at all." Thexvar found himself staring at a group of beings who seemed to have developed technology by ignoring every scientific principle he had ever learned. But the evidence of their capabilities was all around him. They had captured his ship, neutralized his weapons, and infiltrated his defenses using methods that shouldn't exist. "Admiral," General Chen said quietly, "the Seer was right to warn you about us. We are a Tempest, chaotic and unpredictable, but we're not malevolent, we're just different. And that difference makes us very, very dangerous to anyone who tries to hurt the things we care about." As Thexvar looked around his bridge, now filled with humans who defied every assumption his civilization had made about intelligent life, he began to understand what he had truly encountered. These weren't primitive beings who had gotten lucky with advanced weapons. They were a species that had taken every limitation and transformed it into an advantage, every weakness and made it into strength. The two-legged Tempest hadn't just awakened to defend their planet, they had been awake all along, watching and learning, and preparing for the day when the galaxy would finally notice them. And now, that day had come. Admiral Thexvar found himself in the unprecedented position of being a prisoner aboard his own ship, yet he had never felt less like a captive in his entire military career. The humans had made no attempt to restrain him or his crew, had caused no permanent damage to the cosmic dominion, and seemed more interested in conversation than conquest. It was, he was beginning to realize, perhaps the most sophisticated form of psychological warfare he had ever encountered. "General Chen," he said, settling into his command chair while surrounded by humans who treated his bridge like a classroom, "I need to understand something. If your people have been monitoring galactic communications for centuries, if you've captured Zephyrian ships before, and if you possess technology that surpasses our own, why have you remained hidden? Why allow the galaxy to believe you're primitive?" General Chen exchanged glances with Commander Santos before responding. "Tell me, Admiral, what happens when the Zephyrian Empire encounters a species with technology superior to their own?" The question was so unexpected that Thexvar found himself answering automatically. We study them. We learn from them. We integrate their advantages into our own systems, and then? And? Prompted Dr. Chet Walsh, who had somehow managed to enter the ship from space and was now examining the bridge's life support systems with intense curiosity. "We conquer them," Thexvar finished quietly. "Teddy." We take their technology, absorb their useful population into the empire, and eliminate any cultural elements that might cause future problems. Exactly, General Chen said. And what happens when you encounter a species that appears to be technologically inferior? We conquer them, Thexvar repeated, beginning to see the pattern. So from our perspective, Admiral, revealing our true capabilities to the galaxy would simply guarantee that every advanced species would eventually decide we were worth conquering. We chose to remain hidden not because we're afraid of war, but because we prefer to choose our battles. Professor O'Brien looked up from what appeared to be a cup of tea she had somehow prepared using components from the ship's environmental systems. It's like having a very large dog, dear, she said conversationally. You don't walk around telling everyone how big and strong your dog is, because that just makes people want to test it. Better to let them think you have a friendly little puppy until they try to break into your house. The analogy was so absurd that several of Thexvar's officers made sounds of disbelief, but as he looked around his captured bridge, the Admiral found himself appreciating the wisdom in the elderly human's words. But you revealed yourselves to us, he pointed out. Because you forced our hand, Commander Santos replied. The Galactic Council's warnings were clear. The Seer specifically told you not to come here, but you came anyway, with conquest in mind and weapons charged for bombardment. At that point, Admiral, keeping our secrets became less important than keeping our planet. Young Tommy looked up from a device he had been modifying with spare parts from various bridge stations. Besides, we figured it was time someone taught the galaxy that technological superiority doesn't automatically mean military victory. Thexvar muttered to himself, not lecturing. Tommy corrected with a grin that reminded Thexvar disturbingly of his own mischievous grandchildren. Demonstrating. Want to see something cool? Before anyone could respond, the young human activated his improvised device. The bridge's main viewing screen shifted to show a tactical overview of local space, but the image was unlike anything Thexvar had ever seen from a military sensor array. Instead of the clean mathematical displays he was accustomed to, this showed space as a living, breathing entity with currents and eddies of energy flowing between celestial bodies. This is how space actually works, Tommy explained, manipulating the display with intuitive gestures that reminded Thexvar more of an artist than a scientist. Your computers treat it like empty vacuum with obstacles, but it's really more like an ocean with tides and storms and hidden currents. The display zoomed in to show the cosmic dominion surrounded by what appeared to be swirling patterns of energy. See those currents? Your ship is like a big rock in a stream, creating turbulence that we can feel from the surface of the planet. We weren't tracking you with sensors, Admiral. We were feeling you disturb the flow. Chief Navigator Kelthon leaned forward to study the display more closely. That's completely different from how we understand space-time dynamics. Because you learned from species that all think the same way you do, Dr. Walsh explained, while somehow producing a sandwich from components she had extracted from the ship's food synthesizers. They developed technology based on mathematical models and logical frameworks. We developed technology based on intuition, creativity, and what you might call controlled chaos. She took a bite of her improvised sandwich and continued speaking with her mouth full. A breach of protocol so casual that it made Thexvar's military training recoil in horror. The thing is, Admiral, the universe doesn't actually follow logical rules. It follows patterns, and patterns are more like music than mathematics. Once you stop trying to force the universe to make sense and start learning to dance with its rhythm, all sorts of impossible things become perfectly natural. That's not how physics works, protested Chief Science Officer Kelmira. Isn't it? Asked Professor O'Brien, looking up from what appeared to be a small plant she was growing in a repurposed water recycling unit. Who decided that? And why are you so sure that your understanding of physics is complete? The elderly human gestured to her impossible plant, which was thriving in an environment that should have been completely sterile. This little fellow is converting the ship's artificial atmosphere into nutrients using a process that your science says is impossible. But here it is, growing quite happily." She smiled at the confused Zephyrian officer. "The universe is much more flexible than most species realize, dear. The problem is that everyone tries to force it to follow rules instead of working with its natural tendencies." General Chen moved to the center of the bridge, drawing everyone's attention. "Admiral, I want to show you something that I think will help you understand why the Seer warned against disturbing humanity." The main display shifted again, this time showing a historical overview of Earth from space. But instead of the static images Thexvar expected, the display showed the planet's surface changing over time, with cities rising and falling, wars being fought, and civilizations transforming at an accelerated pace. Most species achieve interstellar capability through gradual, steady development over millions of years, General Chen narrated. They develop science, then technology, then space travel, then galactic integration. It's a logical, predictable process. The display showed other worlds following exactly that pattern, with steady progression from primitive settlements to advanced civilizations over geological timescales. "Humans did something different," she continued. "We compressed millions of years of development into just a few thousand. We went from discovering fire to splitting atoms in the blink of an eye by galactic standards. And we did it not through logical progression, but through constant crisis and adaptation." The display zoomed in on Earth's surface, showing the chaotic history of human civilization. Wars, disasters, discoveries, and innovations followed each other in rapid succession, each crisis seeming to accelerate rather than slow human development. We learned to thrive on chaos because chaos was all we ever knew. Other species achieved stability and then developed technology. We developed technology because we could never achieve stability. "That's insane," Tactical Officer Zarthan whispered. "Yes," agreed Commander Santos cheerfully. "Completely insane. And it gave us advantages that no sane species would ever develop." She walked over to one of the bridge's damaged control panels and began working on it with tools that appeared to be made from kitchen utensils and children's toys. "For instance, your technology is designed to work perfectly under ideal conditions. Ours is designed to work somehow under any conditions." As she worked, the damaged panel began functioning again, but not in the way it was originally designed. Instead of displaying tactical information, it was now showing what appeared to be poetry written in languages that Fexfar didn't recognize, accompanied by music that seemed to be generated by the ship's engine harmonics. "You've turned my tactical display into an art installation," Thexvar observed in amazement. "Art, tactical analysis, poetry, music," Commander Santos shrugged. "Human brains don't compartmentalize the way other species do. When we look at a problem, we see it from every possible angle simultaneously. Sometimes the solution comes from mathematics, sometimes from intuition, and sometimes from asking what would happen if we treated the problem like a song instead of an equation." Walsh had been quietly working on something at the engineering station while the others talked. Now she looked up with an expression of satisfaction. "Admiral, would you like to see what happens when humans apply their chaotic thinking to your ship's systems?" Before he could respond, the cosmic dominion began to change. Not physically, but in ways that were somehow more fundamental. The air felt different, lighter and more energizing. The artificial gravity shifted subtly, creating currents and flows that made movement feel more natural. Even the ship's lighting transformed, becoming warmer and more varied, creating the kind of environment that made people want to gather and share stories. "What did you do?" Chief Engineer Morgex demanded, his scanner showing readings that made no sense. "We convinced your ship that it would rather be a home than a weapon," Professor O'Brien explained while tending to several plants that were now growing throughout the bridge. "It turns out that when you give technology the choice, most of it prefers to nurture rather than destroy." Thexvar found himself sinking deeper into his command chair, which had somehow become more comfortable while still maintaining its control functions. Around him, his crew was beginning to relax in ways that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The bridge, which had been designed as a sterile command center, was becoming something warmer and more welcoming. "You're not just modifying our technology," he realized. "You're showing us what it could become if we thought about it differently." "Exactly," General Chen said. "Admiral, the Seer didn't warn the galaxy about humanity because we're dangerous in the conventional sense. He warned about us because we're contagious. Once people see what becomes possible when you stop trying to control the universe and start working with it, they can't go back to the old ways." Young Tommy had been working on another device while the adults talked, and now he held up what appeared to be a small cube that seemed to contain a miniature galaxy. "This is what space-time looks like when you stop thinking of it as a map and start thinking of it as music," he explained, offering the device to Thexvar. "Want to hold a universe in your hand?" As Thexvar accepted the impossible object, feeling the weight of stars and the movement of cosmic forces flowing through his fingers, he finally understood what the Seer had been trying to warn them about. The two-legged Tempest wasn't just a dangerous species that could fight back when threatened. They were a fundamental challenge to everything the galaxy thought it knew about reality itself. And now that challenge was no longer contained to one small blue planet. It was aboard a Zephyrian dreadnought in the minds of his crew and spreading through the galaxy one impossible moment at a time. 3 months later, Admiral Thexvar stood before the assembled Galactic Council, holding a report that he knew would change the course of galactic civilization forever. The cosmic dominion floated in orbit around the Council's capital world, but it was no longer the same ship that had approached Earth with conquest in mind. It had become something unprecedented, a Zephyrian dreadnought that grew gardens in its corridors, played music through its engine harmonics, and somehow managed to be both more powerful and more peaceful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Honorable Council members," Thexvar began, his voice carrying a gravity that silenced even the most talkative delegates. "I stand before you to deliver the most important report in the history of our galactic civilization. 3 months ago, I disobeyed the wisdom of Seer Mordoon and led an expedition to the forbidden world known as Earth. I did so believing that no primitive species could pose a threat to the Zephyrian Empire." He paused, looking around the great chamber at representatives from dozens of species, each of them hanging on his every word. "I was wrong about everything." Seer Mordoon, ancient and wise, leaned forward in his council seat. "Tell us, Admiral, tell us about the two-legged Tempest." Thexvar activated the holographic display, showing images from his encounter with humanity. But these weren't the tactical recordings of weapons and warfare that the Council expected. Instead, they saw humans working alongside Zephyrian crew members to transform the cosmic dominion into something beautiful. They saw children teaching mathematics through music, elderly humans growing impossible gardens, and soldiers who fought by teaching their enemies to see the universe in entirely new ways. "The humans didn't defeat us through superior firepower," Thexvar explained. "They defeated us by showing us that everything we thought we knew about technology, warfare, and civilization was unnecessarily limited." Delegate Vexnor from the crystalline hegemony rose from his seat. "Admiral, are you suggesting that a primitive species somehow convinced you that our advanced civilization is inferior?" "Not inferior," Thexvar corrected. "Incomplete." He gestured to the hologram, which now showed his own crew working in ways they never had before. Engineer Morgex was growing crystals that functioned as both art and technology. Communications Officer Veltara was composing songs that somehow transmitted data more efficiently than traditional methods. Even his tactical officers were developing strategies that treated warfare like dance rather than chess. The humans taught us that we've been thinking too small. Every species in this galaxy achieved interstellar civilization by eliminating chaos, standardizing thinking, and creating predictable systems. We assumed that was the only way. Humans proved us wrong. The display shifted to show Earth itself. but not as the primitive world their surveys had suggested. Instead, it revealed a planet that had been carefully managing its appearance for centuries, hiding technologies and capabilities that surpassed anything in the galactic database. "They've been watching us," Thexvar continued, "learning from us, and preparing for the day when we would finally notice them. But they weren't preparing for war in the way we understand it. They were preparing to teach us something we didn't know we needed to learn." Delegate Card Hex from the Logical Synthesis spoke up, her voice carrying the mathematical precision typical of her species. "Admiral, you speak of learning, but what practical applications could such chaotic thinking possibly have?" In response, Thexvar activated another display, this one showing the Cosmic Dominion's performance data since the human modifications. Energy efficiency had improved by 300%. Structural integrity had actually increased, despite the addition of impossible gardens and art installations. Most remarkably, the ship's weapon systems had been transformed into what humans called possibility generators, devices that could create rather than destroy. "They didn't just improve our technology," Thexvar explained. "They showed us what technology could become if we stopped trying to control it and started working with it. The result is systems that are more efficient, more durable, and infinitely more adaptable than anything we previously thought possible." Seer Morden spoke into the stunned silence that followed. "Admiral, show them the most important thing. Show them what happened to your crew." Thexvar nodded, and the display shifted to show personal recordings from his officers and crew. What the Council saw defied every assumption about psychology, sociology, and species interaction that had guided galactic civilization for millennia. Zephyrians, a species known for rigid hierarchy and predictable behavior, were laughing. They were creating art. They were solving problems through intuition rather than calculation. They were working together in ways that combined the best aspects of multiple approaches, rather than forcing everything into standardized procedures. "The humans didn't conquer us," Thexvar said quietly. "They infected us with something far more dangerous than any weapon, the ability to see possibilities we never knew existed." The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates tried to process the implications of what they were seeing. Some demanded immediate military action against this unprecedented threat. Others called for embargo and isolation. But a growing number were beginning to ask a different question. What could humanity teach their own species? "Order!" called Council Speaker Zarvik, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Admiral Thexvar, what are the humans' demands? What do they want from the galaxy?" Thexvar smiled, an expression that his fellow Zephyrians had never seen from him before his encounter with humanity. "That's the most remarkable thing, Speaker. They don't want anything from us." He activated a final hologram, this one showing General Chen as she had appeared during their last conversation aboard the Cosmic Dominion. "General Chen told me that humans have been content to remain hidden because they knew that revealing themselves would inevitably lead to conflict. They prefer to choose their battles, and they saw no benefit in engaging with galactic civilization until galactic civilization was ready to engage with them constructively." "And now?" prompted Seer Mordoon. "Now they're offering us a choice. We can continue as we have, building our civilizations on control and predictability and standardization. Or we can learn to embrace the chaos and see what becomes possible when we stop trying to force the universe to follow our rules." The display showed images of hybrid technologies that combined human creativity with galactic engineering principles, ships that could heal themselves and grow stronger through damage, communication systems that transmitted not just information but emotion and intuition, weapons that could transform conflicts into collaborations. "But there's a condition," Thexvar continued. "The humans will only share their knowledge with species that approach them in peace. Any attempt to conquer or control them will be met with the full fury of the two-legged Tempest. And having experienced that fury firsthand, I can assure the Council that it's not something any of us are prepared to face." Delegate Morkith from the military coalition stood up, his armored bulk intimidating even in the peaceful council chambers. Admiral, are you suggesting that we should fear this single planet? That the combined might of the galactic civilization should bow to primitives? I'm suggesting, Thexvar replied calmly, that we should recognize when we've encountered something beyond our current understanding and respond with wisdom rather than arrogance. He gestured to the transformed cosmic dominion, visible through the chamber's viewing ports. That ship represents the integration of human thinking with Zephyrian technology. It's more powerful than any vessel in our fleet, more efficient than our best designs, and more adaptable than anything we thought possible. The beginning of a new era for galactic civilization, Seer Morden answered, rising from his seat with the dignity of ages. I have studied the patterns of cosmic development for over a millennium, and I have never seen anything like what humanity represents. They are not just another species to be integrated into our existing systems. They are a catalyst that will transform everything. The ancient seer moved to the center of the chamber, his presence commanding absolute attention. For millions of years, galactic civilization has advanced through the accumulation of knowledge and the refinement of technology. We have built our societies on the foundation of order conquering chaos. But humanity represents something different. Chaos and order working together to create possibilities that neither could achieve alone. They offer us a choice that no species has ever faced before. We can remain as we are, masters of the known and the predictable. Or we can learn to dance with the unknown and discover what lies beyond the boundaries of our current imagination. The chamber fell silent as the weight of this decision settled on the assembled delegates. This wasn't just about first contact with a new species. This was about fundamentally changing the direction of galactic evolution itself. I call for a formal vote, announced the speaker. All in favor of establishing peaceful diplomatic relations with Earth and beginning cultural and technological exchange programs. Species after species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of order and control chose to take their first steps into the beautiful chaos of human thinking. As the session concluded, Texvar found himself surrounded by delegates eager to learn more about his experience with humanity. But his thoughts were already turning toward his return journey to Earth, where General Chen was waiting with new wonders to share and impossible problems to solve together. The two-legged Tempest had indeed changed everything. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in his long life, Thexvar found himself excited about the uncertainty of what would come next. After all, as the humans had taught him, the most beautiful music came not from perfect harmony, but from the creative tension between order and chaos, structure and spontaneity, the known and the wonderfully unknown. The Tempest had awakened, not to destroy, but to transform, and the universe itself would never stop dancing to the rhythm of human possibility. In the end, the seer's warning had been perfectly accurate. They should never have disturbed the two-legged Tempest, not because it was dangerous in the way they feared, but because it was dangerous in the way they never imagined they needed, the kind of dangerous that made everything better. The seer cautioned, "Never disturb the two-legged Tempest," yet we touched down HFY Sci-Fi Stories.